paper's describing this as the largest mobilisation of police in a generation.
Well, it's probably much like the 2011 riots, which I was involved in the investigation there, and I'm sure the police officers would be glad for a night off because they've been so busy under attack. It'll be good for them to have the respite.
Well, I'm sure it will. Look, I mean, what we saw last night and overnight in some cases, I mean, huge amounts of people turning out, but this did remain pretty much peaceful, didn't it?
Yeah, there doesn't seem to be any arrests at all. And what it'll enable the police to do is now to focus on sifting through the footage of previous incidents and finding those who are involved in all sorts of violence or carrying weapons. And so they can be dealt with. So that hopefully the shift can now be to the post-incident investigation, identifying thugs from whoever they are, and getting them arrested and charged.
And what about this intelligence? So police were preparing for 100 protests, riots, demonstrations, whatever you'd like to call them. That's what they were preparing for. That didn't materialise. So does that mean that intelligence was credible? Or does that mean that the police actually just managed to avoid that nightmare scenario?
Well, it doesn't seem very good, does it? You know, that's the idea that was 100 protests. And what's happened with the police, there's been much talk, even the Prime Minister's talk of these alleged far-right thugs being shipped in and bussed in and trained in. And the Daily Telegraph did some analysis of the arrests, and 7 out of 10 people came from within 5 miles of where they're arrested. Now, bearing in mind that many of these incidents occurred in sort of seaside towns, you're going to have people who are there on holiday as well. So this idea there was some coordination and people being moved into the areas for these protests doesn't seem to be right at all.
In a way, that's a positive thing, isn't it? Because if it's less coordinated, it's more likely to die out, isn't it?
Well, it's more likely to die out, but I suppose what it shows is that the government, you know, condemned these people straight away as far-right thugs. Now, with any riots, whether it's the Brixton riots, the riots of 2011, the poll tax riots, whether you agree or disagree with the people involved in them, it's often a shrewd thing to listen to people and say, why is this happening once it's occurred? And then you can analyse it and find reasons to stop it happening. But what's been different about this set of incidents is that the government straight away have just said it's thuggery and have dismissed any legitimate concerns that people might have. And not everybody there is a thug. There are thugs there who are attacking the police, but then there are people there with their kids who are sort of protesting about mass immigration and the like. And I just think sometimes that we need to listen to people and say, why are you doing this? And then it can be stopped next time.
Well, just carrying on from that point, really, what do you make of the speed of which the police and the court system have dealt with all of this? 400 arrests made in relation to the scenes of violence we've seen in the last week or so. 140 people already been charged. Some, as we saw yesterday, already convicted and sentenced.
Well, that's much like 2011. With 2011, there was about 5,000 people prosecuted in London for violence. And of the 5,000, 500 of those were arrested at the time, looting or attacking the police or committing other crimes. So that's very similar. Another 500 were arrested because of fingerprints and DNA. The remaining 4,000 were arrested after the event. So you've got your footage that you're showing now of people attacking the police. That's the sort of thing that the police can now go through and over the coming weeks and months identify those involved in violence and arrest them.
A really interesting point before about, you know, listening to the concerns. How do you work that out though, Mike, when you've got, I mean, obviously people who are committing violent acts are committing a crime. So how do you differentiate between those people who are there for trouble and those people who are making legitimate noises, have legitimate concerns?
Well, as I've said, the 7 out of 10 people were local. So the police make much of speaking to community leaders, particularly if they're from people from ethnic minorities. But somehow they've got to identify somebody who can speak for the people who are at these protests and are not using violence towards the police, are just there to express their legitimate concerns. And the concern seems to be about mass immigration, whether that's legal or illegal. Now, people involved in storming the hotels you can see here and setting fire to, we know that they are thugs and they're doing whatever, but there's a lot of people who are not doing that. And somehow they've got to find people who can articulate and speak and say, these are our concerns. Otherwise, we simply end up with this again. If the politicians refuse to listen, it doesn't really impact on them. It does impact on the police, who get the bricks and wooden planks and whatever thrown at them. And that can't carry on.
Mike, are you hoping that this is now the end of the disorder that we've seen on the streets over the past week or so?
Of course, everybody will be hoping that there is no more riots and any attacks on the police or anybody else for that matter. Let's get that done. But I can only reiterate that we need a long-term solution, so that it is like an enormous boil, and on an enormous boil you can keep putting a sticking plaster, but the boil will erupt, and that can't carry on. And I just think to dismiss people as everybody involved in this as far-right thugs is very foolish. There are some thugs and far-right thugs involved in it, but there are also people who've got legitimate concerns, and they need to be listened to.
OK, Mike, thanks very much indeed. Good